Okay, we're going to go through our quarterback, tight end, and defense rankings. I'm sure a lot of us are streaming tight ends and defenses this week. Starting off quarterback, we all know Josh Allen in a tier by himself. Yeah, week 2 wasn't great against the Dolphins because they boat raced him. But outside of that, you had over 30 points week 1, 30 points week 3. I think Allen gives you the rushing upside, the passing volume. It's an elite offense. I chose the Bills to be my Super Bowl team this year. It is interesting going up against Baltimore, though. You actually only have a 22.5 point implied team total, where the Ravens are actually favored to win this game according to sportsbooks. But going down to tier 2, we are going to have Kyler Murray as their second quarterback. Now, if you head over to flockfantasy.com, I promise you, Kyler Murray will be much lower than this. But the thing with Kyler this week, so he gets to go up against Washington. We have seen time and time again, Washington make the Cincinnati Bengals be one of the best offenses in the league, make the Daniel Jones-led Giants be very serviceable. And then also now you're looking at sportsbooks giving the Arizona Cardinals the highest implied team total of any team in the NFL. Kyler Murray gives you rushing upside as well, where he's averaged over 50 rushing yards per game through the first 3 weeks. So I think Kyler Murray is honestly very easy QB to have at QB2 because of how good the matchup is. Now, Jalen Hurts will be our QB3. Typically, Jalen Hurts is up in that same tier as Josh Allen because with Jalen Hurts, you have a ton of rushing upside as well. Not only do you have him averaging over 50 rushing yards per game, but obviously you have the rushing touchdown upside with Hurts. Now, the issue is you have no A.J. Brown and potentially no Devonta Smith in this game. So if that's going to be the case, this is going to be a much worse supporting cast overall in comparison to what we would naturally expect. We go back last week, Jalen Hurts only scored about 11.94 fantasy points depending on your format. I'm also playing against Jalen Hurts in the Flock League, so I'm really hoping that he does not have a big week. Our next quarterback will be Lamar Jackson. Lamar gives you all the rushing upside in the world. Lamar himself is actually averaging over 80 rushing yards per game. It's just going to be a very tough matchup going up against one of the best defenses in the NFL with the Buffalo Bills. With this being said, though, because this should be a little bit of a closer game, we should actually see more pass attempts for Lamar Jackson. With this past week against Dallas, where it was a blowout, you only had 15 total pass attempts for Lamar and 12 total completions. And then in this same tier, Jaden Daniels is now viewed as a top 5-ish quarterback rest of season. This matchup going up against the Arizona Cardinals should be extremely high scoring. Right now, sportsbooks are saying it's going to be one of the highest scoring games in the entire week with an over-under over 50 points. With Jaden Daniels, you have 3 rushing touchdowns so far this season through the first 3 weeks. He is averaging over 50 rushing yards per game as well. So the rushing upside's there, and it's supposed to be a very high scoring offense. Now, going over to what we have with our next tier, these are going to be the quarterbacks that have no rushing upside, but at the same time, they can potentially get there with passing volume. We're going to have Patrick Mahomes. And with Mahomes, I'll definitely say, make sure you're taking advantage of the free Underdog pick. It's actually available to all Underdog users right now, where regardless if you're new to Underdog or you've been on Underdog for years now, you get that free Patrick Mahomes pick more than less than half total yard. If you're a new member of Underdog Fantasy with a link in the description comment section, you actually get an additional Lamar Jackson free pick more than less than half total yard for the Sunday games as well. And Code Flock will get you that 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Code Flock will get you a free team review in one of the live streams that we are doing every single night. And I will say, I actually just made my largest Underdog pick'em slip I've ever done. It's a long shot, but I'm taking Brandon Ayuk to have a touchdown against Christian Gonzalez this week. Jaden Reed to go higher than 47.5 receiving yards. Rashad White to go higher than 37.5 rushing yards. We actually put $1,000 on that to win about $8,800. So this is by far and away the biggest Underdog pick I've ever had. Please send up some prayers and root for me this week on that. But with Mahomes, the passing volume hasn't been there. You've only had him averaging about 32.5 passing attempts per game. Now, this past week was actually his season high in total pass attempts. I think we may see this offense be a little more pass happy with no Isaiah Pacheco over the next few weeks. Going over to Joe Burrow. Obviously, we had the massive Joe Burrow blow up this past week. Y'all know Burrow was that buy low candidate for us alongside Jamar Chase and Zach Moss. And here Burrow this week will actually be going up against the Carolina Panthers. Now, this matchup itself isn't that tough in terms of just the raw defense you're playing, but this is a spot where you have the Bengals favored by about 5.5 points. So there's that outside chance that you actually see a little more Zach Moss and a little less Joe Burrow in this game. Last week, he looked great, finally getting Higgins and Chase on the same page. You had over 300 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns, but you have no rushing upside, and I think they could possibly run the ball a little bit more in this matchup. And then we will have CJ Stroud down here at QB8. Rest of season, CJ Stroud will actually be ahead of Joe Burrow for me. This week in particular is going to be missing Tank Dell, so it does look like targets going to be more so funneled just through Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. It's not a super big deal, but going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, you have a very similar situation to what the Cincinnati Bengals will be in that the Texans probably don't have to air it out a ton, right? I mean, this is a situation in which there's about a touchdown spread in this game where you could very easily see the passing attempts be a little lower for CJ Stroud in this offense. Now, going down to our next tier, we're going to be looking at Jared Goff here going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Pretty much every single week, what we have seen from the Detroit Lions offense is they are near the top of the NFL in total points scored. But at the same time, a lot of this is based off rushing. You go back to week 1, you only have 28 passing attempts. And week 3, you only have 23 passing attempts. Obviously, Goff's going to give you no rushing upside. So honestly, in my rest of season rankings, I do have Anthony Richardson ahead of Jared Goff. A-Rich will be our next guy here at 10. The reason that we have Anthony Richardson down this low this week is one, obviously, he has been absolute dog water so far this season. Anthony Richardson has had 6 interceptions to 3 passing touchdowns. It's been horrendous, while at the same time, in fantasy, he's been really bad as well. 2 weeks ago, 12.5 fantasy points. This past week, 7 fantasy points. Now, going into the future, I do expect that Anthony Richardson's probably going to run the ball a little bit more and actually have a higher ceiling than this in fantasy football. Even if he's a bad real life quarterback, if he's going to run the ball a ton, you can still see him be viable in fantasy, which is why I actually just made a trade with Sal Fetri. Over there in the Flock League, you can actually check that trade out on the Flock League YouTube channel that will drop very, very soon. But he had Josh Allen and Anthony Richardson. I traded some wide receiver depth and got back A-Rich, so I didn't have to stream quarterbacks anymore. I'm really hoping the long-term rushing upside's here, but this week it's such a tough matchup going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, our next guy will be Jordan Love. Now, obviously with Jordan Love, as the time of this recording, he is not officially cleared to be good to go. Now, of course, I'll be updating the rankings over on flockfantasy.com literally every single day leading up to Sunday. So if Jordan Love is ruled out, I'll tell you right now, one, my pick him on Underdog will be crushed because Jaden Reed will be crushed. Romeo Doubs will be crushed. Christian Watson will be crushed. Everybody in this offense will for the Green Bay Packers. But I'm expecting that Love is good to go. If you're looking at sportsbooks right now, they have the Packers favored over the Minnesota Vikings, which I don't think would be the case if the projection was to have Malik Willis as the starter. I am a little worried with Jordan Love that he's not going to run the ball at all, given the fact that he is coming off a pretty serious knee injury. Then Baker Mayfield will also be a quarterback that probably doesn't run the ball much. We actually had a rushing touchdown back in week 2, but obviously you look at the larger sample of Baker, it's not really going to be prevalent. He has been phenomenal so far this season, though, having 7 total touchdowns through only 3 games. Now, this game going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, you actually have an applied team total of 21 points here. And what we saw last week with this Eagles-Saints matchup was it was a very low-scoring contest where it was more so a defensive struggle. I think that Baker maybe comes back down to earth just a bit. But honestly, I would kind of just rank him as that streaming option where in good matchups you play him and in bad matchups you probably avoid him. Geno Smith going up against the Detroit Lions. So a quarterback that I played last week against Miami did not work out. I thought it was going to be great at the beginning of the game when we had the touchdown, and then it went downhill. Obviously no rushing upside, -2 rushing yards this past week. Going up against the Detroit Lions, though, you have a 21-point implied team total for the Seattle Seahawks. We know this really isn't going to come with their rushing attack because you just have such a good rush defense for the Detroit Lions. So if Seattle's going to be able to effectively move the ball down the field, it's going to have to be through the air. Now, going over to our next guy, we'll be looking at Brock Purdy. Now, I am making this ranking under the assumption that you have no George Kittle this week. If George Kittle does play, Brock Purdy will be a little more exciting than this. But there's about a 10-point spread going up against the New England Patriots here. This is a situation in which I would expect that the passing volume probably isn't going to be there, where we have seen Purdy average over 30 passing attempts a game through the first 3 weeks. If Kittle plays, we're going to be bumping him up probably to the top of this tier. With no Kittle, I would expect Juwan Jennings to be coming back down to earth as well. It's just a game where you're probably not going to have to throw the ball with aggression against the New England Patriots. But please, for the love of God, help me in the comment section. Would you start Anthony Richardson or Brock Purdy this week? I really need your help for the Flock League. But anyway, looking at our next QB, we're going to have Sam Darnold. Now with Darnold, I think that honestly, you can move him up a little bit higher than this if you want. All these quarterbacks are in the same exact tier for a reason. It is kind of up to your personal preference. The main thing that I'm going to be looking at here is if Jordan Addison plays, Darnold becomes a lot more appealing. The passing volume hasn't been crazy for Sam Darnold, where he's averaging only about 25, 26 passing attempts a game so far this season. But at the same time, that's because the Minnesota Vikings defense has been absolutely dominant. And here that's probably not going to be the case going up against the Green Bay Packers, where you do have the Packers favored in this game. So Darnold may have to drop back to pass, and Darnold may have more passing volume overall. Justin Fields will be our next guy at 16. With Fields, the story is rushing upside, rushing upside, rushing upside. Typically, that's what you would want to be betting on. But Justin Fields has actually only averaged about 35.5 rushing yards per game so far this season. He's only had one rushing touchdown through the first 3 weeks. He's only had one game cracking 15 fantasy points. So the Justin Fields rushing upside really isn't playing out in Pittsburgh the way that it did in Chicago. Seems like Matt Tomlin has this as a much more structured offense where they are just limiting negative plays and they are just trying to play good defense and win football games, which is clearly working here. And then our last tier of desperation plays. If you really need somebody to go out there and stream, you'll have Cousins, Caleb, and Aaron Rodgers. But honestly, not super excited about any of those players. Now let's move over to our next position. This is going to be tight end. And dear God, when I say it's impossible to rank tight ends, I mean it's impossible to rank tight ends. Getting out the guys that are automatic starts for you regardless. Brock Bowers will be our tight end one this week. It is a tough matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns, but given the injuries that we have across the board for tight ends, Bowers has been one of the most consistent guys that is going to be available this week. With Bowers, you're sitting here averaging over 60 receiving yards per game. It's a tight end that's had about 7 targets per game as well. So the target volume has consistently been there. It's absolutely crazy. I probably don't have Bowers ranked as my tight end one rest of season because obviously it's hard to project this out in a bad offense in a situation in which we are looking at an extremely small sample of only 3 games. Now, going over to our next tight end, we are going to have Dalton Kincaid. Looking at Dalton Kincaid here, this is a tight end that's playing one of the best offenses in the NFL. We just saw Jake Ferguson find a ton of success against the Baltimore Ravens this past week. We saw Brock Bowers find a ton of success against the Baltimore Ravens 2 weeks ago. And here we actually may see the passing volume go through the roof for the Buffalo Bills in a game where they're about a 1.5 dog against the Baltimore Ravens. If you're looking at the snap rate for Kincaid, it's not encouraging, where over the past 2 weeks, he's only averaged about 50% of the snaps played here in Buffalo, but both games have been blowouts, and he was taken out of the second week to be evaluated for a concussion. So honestly, I don't think the snap rates mean a ton. Now going over to another tier 1 tight end this week, Dallas Goedert looks to be a tier 1 tight end. If you wanted to rank Dallas Goedert as the tight end 1 overall, just for this week, I'm okay with it. If you head over to flockfantasy.com to check out the rest of season rankings, there you'll see Dallas Goedert definitely is near the bottom end of the tight end ones, because in the long term, especially after week 5 coming out of the bye, you'll have Devonta Smith back in this offense. You'll have A.J. Brown back in this offense. Dallas Goedert will be the 4th option, potentially the 5th option if you count Jalen Hurts rushing the football himself. But as of it stands now, he had 11 targets this past week because the injuries that you had in this offense. And I think that he probably is set up to dominate targets yet again. Now going over to our next tier, we're going to be led off with Travis Kelce. Yes, a tight end that is yet to crack 40 receiving yards. Yes, a tight end that has not had a receiving touchdown. And yes, a tight end that's only averaging 4 targets a game. In a matchup that's not great going up against the Chargers, potentially with no Justin Herbert. So it could be a spot where the Chiefs do decide to just go out there and run the ball a little bit more. Clearly, Kelce is a faller, and I want to say that Kelce is someone that you should avoid if you can. But based off the injuries that we have to the position, based off how bad everybody else has looked, it will be extremely difficult to say that. Going over to Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is another tight end that is only averaging 4 targets a game. Now, yes, Kyle Pitts has scored a touchdown this season, so it does make Kyle Pitts look like he's been a better option in fantasy than what you've had with Travis Kelce through the first 3 weeks. But going into the future, I think that's difficult to project, and I would assume that we are going to get more points scored in Kansas City than we will in Atlanta. And then we are going to be going with Mark Andrews here as tight end 6. Now, if you are looking at Andrews, completely understand why you should be panicked about him. I agree with you. The man played 33% of the snaps for the Baltimore Ravens this past week. But the reason for this is the Baltimore Ravens boat raced the Dallas Cowboys. It was a game where they were going out there to run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. This next week against the Buffalo Bills, I don't necessarily know if that will be something that's as easy for them to do, just because Buffalo is looking like one of the best teams in the league. I think we actually have some more passing volume here, similar to what you had week 1 with Kansas City, where you did have a ton of points going to the tight end position, even if it was Isaiah Likely. Now, going over to our next guy, we'll have Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz averaging about 4.5 targets per game. This is a matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, where it should be a very high-scoring game overall. But the issue is Zach Ertz doesn't really have any big play potential. Zach Ertz hasn't really had any red zone usage, has yet to score a touchdown in this offense. Now, obviously, Jaden Daniels looks great, and Ben Sinnott at the same time is a tight end that has no role whatsoever. So Ertz does look like you can rely on him as a tight end 1. Isaiah Likely over the past 2 weeks has averaged 2 targets a game. He's had 4 targets over the past 2 weeks after blowing up for the 111 receiving yards after week 1. After week 1, it looked like Isaiah Likely was going to be straight up league-winning tight end. Not happening at this point. I think he's still a borderline play. Like we said, I think you see more dropbacks and more snaps for both Likely and Andrews, since there will be more passing volume against the Buffalo Bills. Cole Kmet will be our next tight end here. Cole Kmet is the tight end that just had the massive 11 target game. Cole Kmet's the guy that just had the receiving touchdown. He just had Isaiah Likely's week 1 performance in week 3. And at the same time, Kmet's usage is at an all-time high for this season, specifically with Gerald Everett getting a little phased out of this offense. Now, what I would be looking at here with Kmet is the fact that you had no Keenan Allen last week. You had over 50 pass attempts for Caleb Williams. I think the passing volume comes down in this offense, and Keenan Allen potentially coming back in should eat into the Kmet usage. Now, going over to Mike Gesicki. Gesicki's only played about 45% of the Cincinnati Bengals snaps so far this season. But with that, he's actually been great seeing volume. I mean, he's had a total of 18 targets. He's averaging 6 targets a game in a very good offense. But the issue is Eric Hall actually looks like he's been the more efficient tight end so far. So I would expect that potentially Gesicki scales back just a bit and we see a little bit more of the rookie tight ends. Now, obviously, you can tell with these rankings, I'm making them under the assumption that Sam Laporta and George Kittle both miss. It goes without saying, if either one plays, you go ahead and you play them over these streaming options, right? But myself, I'm expecting that Laporta is going to miss. So what I had to do this week in the Flock League is I had to go to the waiver wire and pick up Pat Freiermuth to play. If you are looking at Freiermuth, he played a season high 81% of the snaps this past week against the Chargers. Darnell Washington did get scaled back. You've had about 4.5 targets per game for Pat Freiermuth in this offense. Now, the underlying issue that you're going to have here, of course, is this is just a low volume passing attack with Justin Fields under center. Now, going over to what we have with our next tier, we're going to have Taysom Hill, who has been cleared good to go week 4. And at the same time, Kamara did not practice Wednesday. Now, of course, it's going to be very important to keep up with the Alvin Kamara practice reports on both Thursday and Friday. You know, I'll be updating the rankings on the site every single day. You know, I'll be live streaming every single night to answer all those questions through the site as well. So we'll definitely keep you posted. But if Kamara doesn't play, Taysom Hill at that point is probably a must-start player. But obviously, touchdown or bust here. Dalton Schultz is a tight end that's actually sitting out there on the waiver wire in the Flock League right now. I did consider potentially picking him up, but I mean, you have not had a single week with over 5 targets. But honestly, now that you have no Tank Dell, potentially Dalton Schultz will see a little more usage here against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's averaged about 4.5 targets per game, which is similar to what we've had with Pat Freiermuth, and you have better quarterback play. So please let me know in the comment section, would you rather have Dalton Schultz or Freiermuth this week? Because I may have to make that pivot myself. Cade Otton will be our next guy. Cade Otton this past week, 8 targets. It was great. But at the same time, if we're looking from a season-long perspective, he's averaging 4 targets a game. I mean, the man's averaging a little over 2 receptions per game. He's had 52 receiving yards this season. Everything's getting funneled through Evans. Everything's getting funneled through Godwin. Like, to be honest with you, I need to move Colby Parkinson up. Cade Otton needs to fall behind both the combo of Parkinson and Tyler Conklin. As you go over to Colby Parkinson, he's played over 80% of the snaps every single week here for Los Angeles. This past week, with no Cup, with no Puka Nacua, you ended up seeing 5 targets. Now, at the same time, Parkinson obviously isn't a super talented player. He's been very inefficient, only seeing, about 6 yards per target so far this season. But with that being said, the opportunity is there, and you have a great coach and great quarterback play. Tyler Conklin had a phenomenal Thursday night performance against the New England Patriots. He gives you the 93 receiving yards, but before week 3, he had 16 receiving yards so far this season. Going up against the Denver Broncos, it's a spot where the Jets are probably just going to be able to play good defense, run the ball, and win the game that way. Noah Fant had his best game of the season last week with 12 fantasy points, but you actually saw the snaps fall a decent bit, falling down to 44%. You're getting a lot of 3 wide receiver sets here in Seattle, so I do expect the majority of the target volume to be funneled through the receivers. And then Hunter Henry as our last option here. Hunter Henry is actually seeing 6 targets a game. So you could very easily move Henry above this. My thing is, I just don't see any touchdown upside in an offense that has about a 15-point implied team total. Now, going over to the defensive list, tier 1, and let me put a massive disclaimer here as well. I want to reiterate, I went years without playing with defenses in fantasy football. This is the first year I played with defenses in my league, probably since 2017. So I am by no means an expert when it comes to streaming defenses. I'm trying to do my best and trying to look at all these projections and bring you the most valuable information I can find. But don't be using me as your only resource for defenses, for the love of God. But anyway, tier 1, we're going to have the Jets, the Niners, and the Chiefs. I think the Niners will be the best defense going up against the New England Patriots, where actually last week, the Jets were able to drop 17 points on New England as a DST, obviously dependent on your league settings. With the Niners, you are averaging, about 2.5 sacks per game. You've had some interceptions. You've had 3 forced fumbles so far this season. I just think this will probably be the best matchup that they've had of the year. After this Pats matchup, I'm a little bit worried about them. They are my defense in the flock league. The Jets will be the next best. The Jets going up against the Denver Broncos. The Broncos only have a 16-point implied team total. Obviously, the Jets defense was phenomenal last week with 7 sacks against the Patriots. The Kansas City Chiefs will be the next defense after this. So you have the Joe Alt injury and you have the Justin Herbert injury. So you only have a 16-point implied team total for the Los Angeles Chargers going up against the Chiefs. Chiefs defense has been great. Of course, I do want to reiterate here that if you're in a situation in which Justin Herbert does play, the Chiefs do go down this list a decent bit. The Miami Dolphins will be our next team. Looking at Miami, you're going up against the Tennessee Titans. You're actually favored in this game. You're averaging 2 sacks so far a game this season. And obviously, Will Levis has been a turnover machine. The Steelers will be the next DST we have. The Steelers, one of the best defenses in the league this year. You've gotten 10 points every single week in fantasy. They have gone out there and they've averaged 3 sacks a game. They've given you 4 total interceptions. Going up against Anthony Richardson. Richardson's been turning the ball over a ton. Steelers clearly top 5 option. You can make an argument for tier 1. The Titans will be our next defense here. With the Titans, they were averaging over 2 sacks a game. Really haven't generated any turnovers here. 0 fumble recoveries, 0 interceptions. But obviously, a Miami Dolphins offense with no Tua is projected near the bottom of the NFL in points scored this week. Then we're going to be going with the Raiders. The Raiders going up against Deshaun Watson. The Raiders have been a very bad defense so far this season. But they played the Chargers, the Ravens, and then the god of all quarterbacks, Andy Dalton. So it should be a much better matchup. And we'll actually have the Browns right after as well. If you're looking at like a couple of these defenses all being ranked next to each other, right now sportsbooks are telling us that the lowest scoring games will be the Dolphins Titans and the Browns Raiders this week. So I think you could start maybe all defenses involved. Chicago's actually had a very good defense so far this season. They just completely destroyed Will Levis week 1, where they ended up generating 25 points depending on your format. They get you the touchdown, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, and 3 sacks. They've had 7 total sacks this year. If you're looking at what sportsbooks are saying right now, they actually have the Bears favored over the Rams, where obviously the Rams are sitting here with 5 offensive linemen on the IR, and at the same time, no Puka, no Cup. The Houston Texans will be our next DST. The Texans have just been generating a ridiculous amount of sacks. 13 sacks so far through the first 3 weeks. They're averaging an interception a game as well. And Trevor Lawrence been really bad. The Texans are about 7-point favorites in this game. The Minnesota Vikings are currently leading the NFL in sacks with 14. The Minnesota Vikings have been the number 1 defense in fantasy football. They've been great. They've been great against top-end quarterbacks as well. I am always a little bit hesitant to go out there and play a defense, however, that is going up against a great quarterback in Jordan Love, where they are underdogs at the same time. But keep in mind, I was also the same guy to tell you not to play the Minnesota Vikings defense last week. And yes, the defense last week dropped 13 points against the Texans. Our next team will be the Indianapolis Colts going up against Justin Fields. The Colts have had 8 total sacks this season. They've also been able to grab 4 turnovers as well, so it's not the worst spot in the world going up against Justin Fields. Then the options that we're less excited about, we have the Rams playing Caleb Williams. We have the Bengals playing Andy Dalton. We have the Packers going up against Sam Darnold. The Packers had a ridiculous 8 sacks last week, 2 interceptions, and the touchdown, but obviously they were playing Will Levis. Vikings will be a tougher matchup. And then we have the Falcons, Eagles, Lions, Saints as defenses that this week probably have better options with, even though honestly, as we look at these rankings, the Saints probably should be higher on this list. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, I really do appreciate you. I really hope I was able to help you out in some way here. And yeah, I'll be live streaming every single day until the season ends. So make sure you come out, hang out with me in the live streams. You can ask any question you want through flockfantasy.com. And if you wanted to get a free team review in one of those live streams, the best way to do so is take advantage of the offer that we have with Underdog Fantasy. We're over there on Underdog. If you use promo code FLOCK, you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you will get that free Patrick Mahomes pick, more than less than half a total yard for this Sunday. That free Lamar Jackson pick, more than less than half a total yard for this Sunday. And that free team review through flockfantasy.com. Just make sure you set up an account on flockfantasy.com with the same email address as your Underdog account. That way we can accredit you with the free team review after. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day. And I'll be good to see you out with the live stream later tonight.